At long last, we see ourselves starting to get somewhere with the Breen and Buchanan investigation. I don't know if people realise, but it was through FAIR and through ourselves that this inquiry was actually started. People laughed at us whenever we first became involved in this, but Judge Curry, whenever we met him, it was through the evidence and the individuals that we brought to him that we were able to get this inquiry started. Because this is not simply about the two individuals who was murdered that day, although they play a major part in it, but it actually ties into quite a number of murders in the South Armagh area. A number of the boys who were there that day had carried out a number of murders over the last, some of them going back 20, 25 years, and maybe even longer. All the godfathers were even out that day, so it actually reaches further. But the main thing that's going to come out of this, and at long last we see the Smithic team actually, I now believe, trying to put the effort in to bring this to some type of conclusion, where the inquiry, when it starts, there is evidence there, because we know that more evidence has come to light, and we're actually quite pleased with ourselves at the minute, because we see a number of individuals here now coming forward who has vital information and who will prove that collusion went on with the guards in South Armagh. And I'll say that again, not with the PSNI, not with the EDR, not with the British Army, but with the guards in the border area. Something we've been saying for this last 20 odd years, but nobody wants to listen to us. This inquiry will not be simply about the two individuals, although it's very important that it comes to light what happened that day with them two individuals. But this is wider. This is about numerous murders that were carried out in South Armagh. Some of them, some of the worst atrocities in the history of this country, if not in the history of Europe, that was carried out. Mass murder, torture, you name it, these people were involved in it. And at long last, it'll not just be one guard that'll be named, it'll be a number of guards whose names will be coming out. But with that said, we can't blame all the guards. There's a lot of good guards as well. Same as was within the RUC. There was a few individuals perhaps was involved. In the guards, you'll find there's quite a few individuals involved in collusion with the IRA. So at long last, we're starting to see our work come to some type of tuition whereby we're starting to see results. So it's the same as Libya. They laughed at us with Libya. They laughed at us with the whole victims issue when we started. They laughed at us with the Breen Buchanan inquiry. There's not too many laughing now. And the other thing, the inquiry into at least 100 odd murders that we've been working on, they will not be laughing at us when we bring that to tuition. Because Mr. McCooey, the only one who was convicted, was the Tullyvallen massacre. We would call on the Attorney General to instigate an investigation into the Tullyvallen massacre, because one of the individuals that was shot by an off-duty police officer who was in the hall that night. Now these people murdered 5 individuals and intended to murder everybody in that hall. Whenever the off-duty police officer returned fire, he got one shot off before he was hit 3 times himself, but it was enough to drive these Kurds back out through the door. Man, whenever he was hit, he could be heard squealing like a pig, because it was okay them shooting unarmed civilians, but whenever somebody returned fire, they couldn't take it. We know the name of this individual. We know the security forces know it, because McCooey told them who it was. But not only that, we have other evidence. There's DNA that could be made available, because he was wounded that night. Whenever you're shot, there usually is blood. We demand that we have an inquiry into the Tullyvallen massacre, which in turn leads to the investigation of at least 100 other murders that we have tied this gang in with. Now, if the Attorney General wants to do something worthwhile, instead of calling for an inquiry into a terrorist who they say that may or may not have been armed, who cares? He's a terrorist. So who cares if he was armed or unarmed. But I'll tell you what people do care about. Men sitting reading a Bible whenever masked gunmen come in and try to murder every one of them in the hall, or 11 workmen coming home from doing a day's work, or a fella who was a greengrocer out delivering goods, taken, kidnapped and tortured, or another individual who was hung from a tree after he had his throat cut and stabbed 57 times. People care about that. So we would ask the Attorney General to call for an investigation into that, because the evidence is there, the proof is there. McCooey, whenever he was questioned, he broke down. He cried like a baby whenever he told about who was involved in all them operations, because he knew, maybe not every one of them, but quite a few of them, and as well knowing that the same gang was involved in a large number of murders. We're talking about perhaps 100 murders, but we know it reaches out far wider than that. But we can't go wider because we haven't got the proof, we haven't got the evidence. But we believe that this gang could be adding up to 150, 200 murders. And not one, with the exception of McCooey, who was arrested for a drunken act across the border. He was actually arrested by the police for something that he carried out on the southern side of the border. And this is the laughable thing about it. They didn't even arrest him for any of the murders that went on in South Armagh. They arrested him for something he did in the southern side of the border. But whenever they arrested him, lo and behold, he broke down, for he thought he was being arrested with his involvement in all the murders. And as the police once said, they had to break the pen to get it off him, because he was crying like a baby. But a lot of the things that he said tied up with a lot of other evidence that the police have. So we would ask the Attorney General to stand up now and show us that he's impartial, to demand that there's an inquiry into the Tullyval massacre and the Kingsmill massacre, and upwards of 100 odd murders. If you're going to do this job, well then be impartial. Don't call for an investigation into the murder of a terrorist, or I wouldn't even call it a murder, the shooting of a terrorist, because who cares if he was armed or unarmed? He chose to live by the gun, so he died by the gun. But the men in the hall, the men coming into the church to do a night's worship, the men coming home from their day's work, they certainly weren't involved in any terrorist activity. So show that you are impartial. Everybody knows who this man was that was shot the night at Tullyval by the off-duty police officer. He has a bullet wound in his left shoulder. It's not hard to prove that he's been shot. We demand now that this is investigated, and this is what we are working on next. So I'd say to the Provies in South Armagh, you laughed at us about Libya, you laughed at us about the Brendan Buchanan inquiry, you laughed at us whenever we started to bring up the victims issue. I just asked you, are you laughing now on them issues? I don't think so. I can assure you, before we're finished, we will have our inquiry into the Tullyval and the Kings Mills and them other murders in that area, because we know every one of you that were involved in it. And McCooey, we would like you to come forward now and willingly give your information. You talk at the IRA, talk about they want to move on. Well, here's your chance to show us that you just want to move on. You give the information openly and willingly whenever you're in the police custody. Matter of fact, like, they had to break the pen to get it off you. Well, we're asking you now to come forward and speak to us and give us the information that we need to close the book on South Armagh. It's not much to ask of a gutless murderer for you to come forward and speak to the victims.